So the first week we reviewed again shamatha vipassana meditation as the only meditation method that the Buddha ever taught, and he taught it for the reasons that relate to the name shamatha vipassana. That's not a name that I've ever found that the Buddha used to describe his meditation practice, but he mentions shamatha, being mindful of the breath to create a well-concentrated mind, to calm the mind. Shamatha usually is translated to tranquil or tranquility. And vipassana, which means insight. And the Buddha taught in the Yuganada Sutta and many other suttas that any effective meditation practice must have those two components or those two themes. Must have a way of concentrating the mind by being mindful of the breath that supports gaining very specific insight into three marks of existence. And he taught, just to reiterate that point because it's so important, he taught meditation for the sole purpose of deepening concentration or developing jhana. We went through that series of, I think, 7 suttas on jhana, and each one addresses the idea of concentration from slightly different perceptions or perspectives, but in a way that relates directly to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And I'll explain that in a little bit. A human mind is so prone to distraction that it can pick up specific themes that are used to overcome distraction. But because it's now distracted by this other theme, it's losing the point of meditation. So now I'll explain that, and it relates to the rest of the Satipatthana Sutta. The Buddha studied with different teachers. He mastered all of the things that he studied, including from 2 very specific teachers, Alara Kalama and Udeka Ramaputta, who taught what was considered very advanced meditation practices. And again, Siddhartha Gautama mastered them very quickly and realized that they were simply more of a distraction. And I can't think of the name of the sutta now, where the Buddha describes his awakening. Anybody remember it?
Nagara Sutta.
That and the
Upada?
it doesn't really matter. Where the Buddha describes how he studied with these different teachers, they taught these different realms. He rejected them as just mere distraction. He touches on the same subject in those suttas on jhana. And the point of all that, and the point really of the Satipatthana Sutta, is to keep your meditation practice pure and well focused on simply developing concentration, and don't fall into the distraction of applying it in ways it was never meant. So we use meditation to deepen concentration. From a well-concentrated mind, we're able to develop the refined mindfulness necessary to hold in mind the Eightfold Path. If he was teaching meditation as mindfulness, the 7th factor and the 8th factor of the Eightfold Path wouldn't be right mindfulness and right meditation. There'd just be 7 factors, right mindfulness, meditation. But he taught mindfulness and meditation as 2 separate themes, and it's important to remember that. Meditation deepens concentration so that we can hold in mind mindfulness, the other themes that are important to developing the Eightfold Path. Is that clear to everyone? Not making it more confusing than it is, because it really isn't. From the Satipatthana Sutta. On one occasion, the Buddha was in Kamasadhamma, where he addressed those assembled. Friends, there are 4 frames of references, 4 foundations of mindfulness that are required for the purification of all beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and regret, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for establishing the right method of practice, and for complete unbinding. Pretty powerful statement, isn't it? These are the 4 foundations of mindfulness that the Buddha teaches that are required if we're going to overcome ignorance and stress, suffering. 1, being mindful of the breath in the body, determined and alert, and abandoning craving and aversion to what is occurring. We do that. We learn in the series on jhana. The first level of jhana relates to this first foundation of mindfulness. Become mindful of the breath in the body. And in relation to understanding jhana, then the Buddha would say, notice it's a pleasant It's a pleasant experience born of seclusion, that very seclusion that the Buddha teaches. So we do this every time in meditation, hopefully, if we're doing right meditation. We've disentangled ourselves from the world. We found our meditation spot. We sit down. We might take a breath or two, and then we become mindful of the breath in the body. It's the first foundation of mindfulness. And as we're doing that, we are determined and alert, and we're abandoning craving and aversion to what is occurring, meaning being mindful of simply the breath. No matter what's occurring, I don't crave after it, and I have no aversion in that moment. For most of us, especially as beginning meditators, as soon as we become mindful of the breath, our thoughts are now attached to something, whether it's in the past or the future, what we might need, what we might get, an argument we had earlier in the day. And what do we do at that point? Well, the Buddha teaches us in this sutta, whenever that occurs, whenever any distraction arises in the mind, to come back to the sensation of breathing. That's abandoning craving and aversion in relation to the world. 2, being mindful of feelings arising from the sixth sense base. And that just means the sixth sense base are our 5 physical symptoms, and the sixth base, the sixth part of that sixth sense base of consciousness. But it's consciousness in this sense, it's ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance of 4 noble truths. So obviously, what in meditation, our distractions are going to arise about something that has come in contact with us through our senses, isn't it? Because everything does. So again, not to get too overly analytical about, okay, the sixth sense base is coming in. It just simply means what you have encountered in your life, you are now bringing onto your meditation cushion, and it's distracting you. When it does, what do? Come back to the sensation of breathing, the second foundation of mindfulness. Being mindful of thoughts arising from the sixth sense base, determined and alert, and abandoning craving and aversion to what is occurring. The fourth foundation, being mindful of the present quality of mind, determined and alert, and abandoning craving and aversion to what is occurring. When I say it, the last instruction, does everybody understand now the guidance that I give during meditation, how it relates directly to the 4 foundations of mindfulness? Everybody sees that? If you don't, please say no, because I can't tell if you're just shaking your head, because I would want to explain it further, but you all get it. Good. In this last foundation of mindfulness, at the end of our meditation, what do I say? Notice the quality of your mind, be at peace with your mind. That's related to the 4th foundation of mindfulness. And abandoning craving and aversion to what is occurring means, and another way that I say it is, be at peace with a less than peaceful mind state. If you find during your meditation or off your cushion that your mind is still agitated, that's okay. You won't lose your mind any further, mindlessness, if you are at peace with the present quality of your mind. In other words, we can insist that our meditation practice always leaves us in a blissful state. And if we have that precondition put on our meditation practice, we're almost always going to be disappointed, for one thing. And we'll be disappointed not because of that we're missing something in general, we're missing something specific. The Buddha's instructions on what to do when we find a less than peaceful mind state. We simply acknowledge that that's what's occurring in my mind. We understand impermanence, and we understand that within the next breath or the next development of concentration, that's all going to change. Frank.
I'm just identifying that in the beginning of meditation, that's kind of what gave me insight into where I was craving and clinging and aversion to things. It really gave me a good understanding of that first noble truth, I think, when I look back on that.
By noticing where you were distracted.
The quality of mind during my meditation, it gave me insight into the first noble truth and the second noble truth.
Thank you. Glad you're back. That's exactly it. That's what the Buddha's talking about. The 4th foundation of mind, the quality of our mind, is the result of a proper meditation practice or a recognition that we become distracted by our feelings and thoughts. And now the quality of my mind is distracted or less than peaceful. That just means take another breath. It doesn't mean you've done something wrong in your meditation. It certainly doesn't mean you should abandon it. It simply means you need a little more practice.
When I'm meditating, I try to not interfere with my meditation, meaning mentally interfere with it. Like I try not to take long breaths or deep breaths or shallow breaths or whatever. is that really how you, and you just observe, I try to just observe my body breathing without interfering with it.
Mm-hmm.
So by analyzing my breath that way, is that then creating another distraction?
Doesn't sound like you're analyzing your breath at all. It sounds like you're using your breath as it should be, noticing that you're breathing.
Well, I'm not just noticing it. I'm trying to not, if I'm breathing heavily or deeply or something like that, I try to not do that.
Yeah.
Because I know it's not natural breathing. When you think about your breathing, you alter it.
Yeah.
I do it.
Most people do,
So,
especially
yeah.
if you're
Notice the
victims
quality
of
your
trauma.
mind.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Isn't that also what you were talking about, John, about directive thought?
Yep, that's part of the early meditation practice, meaning the beginning of a sit,
Yeah.
not early in a meditation practice, although it might be that too. It's a fine line that I think you're talking about, because if you're finding yourself distracted by questioning what type of breath you have, then you probably have a little bit too much focus on the breath. But even at that point, if you find yourself there, you take a breath, notice that that's what the distraction is, and come back to the sensation of breathing. And over time, this is a little bit of Pavlovian dog kind of thing. The more you do that, the less the distraction will arise.
Yeah.
You're almost treating or training yourself to recognize this is just something that's foam on the ocean. Just ignore it and it'll fall away.
You know, in the Anapanasati Sutta, it says, when breathing in long, notice that you're breathing in long. When you're breathing in short, notice that you're breathing in short. Doesn't mean that you have to do anything about it. It's just
Being aware of it.
aware.
That's
of it.
all. Just like anything else. And that you mentioned, I am going to conclude our whole Dhamma practice this time with Anapanasati Sutta. We'll probably spend 3 or 4 weeks on that, because that describes, again, it's not an instruction for meditation. It describes a proper meditation or a proper Dhamma practice. Did I answer your question?
Can I do notice that when I return from a distraction, that first breath that I then see is always a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
That's interesting because
A little more directed.
there's tension that arose through thinking. So you're thinking about something, you're distracted by something. So
Natural tension is there.
a natural tension developed. So when you recognize that you were caught up in your thinking, you release the tension, the diaphragm can extend, and you get a bigger breath.
Did anybody pick up on that I was smiling when I was listening? Does everybody get how significant this talk is that we're having? Because we're all talking about right meditation and the proper application and what occurs during right meditation. These things arise, and they're there to be recognized as simply something arising and passing away and coming back to the sensation of breathing.
But it is a bit of a subtle process.
It's incredibly subtle.
It requires a lot of mindfulness.
It requires a lot of concentration to develop the type of mindfulness to pick, and it requires the right framework. In other words, if we weren't aware of the essential nature of eye making and all this, the question wouldn't even arise, would it? You wouldn't notice it. That's where the framework of the Eightfold Path is important. It's not just meditation. So often meditation, and I see this in what I'm about to say doesn't mean that everybody that meditates with wrong meditation is going to lose their mind, but I've seen it greatly increase borderline psychoses in people. Because if you don't have the right framework, you're only increasing, and you're further developing the problems that you are holding in your mind in relation to right view.
It becomes a bad feedback loop.
Yes, with the right framework, you can see things like this. You can recognize things that are to be abandoned, and it can be tricky. Sometimes it might say, well, am I developing aversion towards this? No. But you first have to recognize what needs to be, the essence of mindfulness is recognition first of what needs to be abandoned, what's rooted in ignorance. All right, let me continue. I won't get through this. I'm going to go back just to the beginning of that. Being mindful of the present quality of mind, determined and alert and abandoning craving and aversion to what is occurring. That's in reference to the fourth foundation of mindfulness. Now, the Buddha is going to break this down a little bit deeper. This is the breath in the body. And how does one remain mindful of the breath in the body in and of itself? In and of itself simply means, whenever you hear me say that, so I won't have to say it all the time, in and of itself simply means free of distraction. Being mindful of the breath in the body in and of itself, being mindful of the breath in the body, free of any distraction. Finding a secluded spot, the shade of a tree or an empty hut, sitting erect with legs crossed in front, placing attention on the breath. We all do that to begin our meditation. Remaining mindful of the breath, breathe in and breathe out. We all do that. I'm not trying to be silly here or funny. I'm emphasizing that we're engaging in the meditation method that the Buddha taught. Mindful of the breath, long or short, breathe in and breathe out. Meaning however we find our breath, breathe in that way. And that contradicts a lot of modern breath mindfulness practices, which are taught to manipulate the breath in certain ways. And I actually created one years ago. Does anybody remember the rebirthing craze from 150 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I created my own. It was called the soul breath. And it really worked. At least I thought it worked. I tricked people into believing it worked. Training yourself to be sensitive to the breath and calming any bodily fabrication. Again, the intention isn't to calm bodily fabrications. By simply being mindful of the breath, bodily fabrications subside. Calming bodily fabrications. It's not an intention of meditation. It's a result of right meditation. It's important because, again, there's meditation methods that we should be focused on what's occurring in our body, and wherever we find tension, to breathe into the tension and all this. That may be great, but it's not what the Buddha taught. And by the way, you can only breathe into your lungs. You can't breathe into your foot or anything else. Well, you can't.
Try really hard.
Yeah. Ever mindful, calming the body with each in-breath and each out-breath. Again, we're not trying to calm the body. It's a natural occurrence of right meditation. Remaining mindful of the breath in the body, mindful of the in-breath and the out-breath, the arising and passing away of phenomena with regard to the body. Any phenomena, it's not a specific phenomena. We're learning from simply being mindful of the arising and the passing away of the breath in the body, a direct and practical lesson on impermanence. Our own breath is impermanent, isn't it? And by being mindful of our breath, and when we find ourselves distracted by a thought or a feeling, to be mindful of the fleeting nature of that. In other words, I find that I'm thinking about a thought that I had, and I'm running with it, and I catch myself in it. I come back to the sensation of breathing. The thought is gone. It's a lesson in impermanence. No matter how strongly I'm identifying myself with my thoughts, no matter how strong I think the connection is, it's like foam on the ocean. The only connection is in my own mind. Come back to the sensation of breathing, the connection's gone. And my mind in that moment is shamatha. It's tranquil, it's calm, and it's at peace. The next moment might have my thought going again, stuck in that self-referential views. But in meditation, that's fine. In other words, it's not wrong that I'm back up in my thoughts again. It's an opportunity. Let me put it this way. Every time I find myself caught up in a feeling or thought is an opportunity to deepen concentration. It's something to look at in a positive light, if I want to use. I don't like to use that term a lot, but it's a good thing to recognize that you're caught up in your thoughts and you come back to the sensation of breathing because you're deepening your concentration.
Then you have a point of recognition of the rising and the passing.
Yes, and thank you for that. And it's important to notice both of these things. Most of us notice the arising of something, whatever it might be. And in our thoughts, it's usually the arising of a feeling or a thought that we attach ourselves to, and we miss the passing away. But if we're mindful and well concentrated enough, we'll notice that feelings and thoughts arise and pass away. Lorna talked about that a few times in a very eloquent way. It's important to see both aspects of our breath and of our life, the arising and passing away. And so that when we can develop that profound understanding of impermanence, we've developed a profound understanding of both the micro and the macro experience of impermanence. In other words, this moment in my life Each moment in my life arises and passes away. And my whole life arises and passes away, doesn't it? It's one thing. It's one experience. Except when I start bifurcating it, excuse the word, by I making. And then I'm taking the individual flow of my life and saying, wait, I want to establish myself here. I don't want to establish myself here. Here is good, there is bad. And so my whole life becomes in my rear view mirror and looking forward in the past. And I've just lost my life. I'm not living the arising and the passing away of each moment. So the method that, the profound method that the Buddha taught is both a very practical experience of impermanence, and it's also metaphor for, at the same time, the arising and the passing away. Frank.
When you were explaining that, I was just thinking how the arising and passing away of taking things personal like happens when you come back to the breath off the cushion throughout your day.
Yeah.
When you're mindful of the quality of mind and you feel the thought or the feeling arise, it's like that 5 clinging aggregates, taking that personal, and as soon as you can identify it and come back to the breath, the impermanence of personalization is gone.
It's gone. Yep. And what did you learn in that moment? What did you learn in that moment?
We understood.
We're just these 6 properties. There's nothing personal. There's nothing special about any of us. There's nothing special about the Buddha except in the way that he lived his life. And I think he would say the same thing. I mean, he says it in different ways. And there's nothing special about us except the way we live our lives.
I think the one thing that you really learn as you go along with this practice is that it involves total engagement. Mindfulness is totally engaged. You're not meditating to put yourself into a trance or into some sort of calm state where you're almost not aware. It's total engagement with the mindfulness. Yep. So you are aware of everything that arises.
Thank you. That's the essence of concentration, isn't it? Total engagement with what's occurring, but in a very gentle way. And again, gentleness is a quality that follows from eliminating I-making or taking things personal. It's the essence of it.
It's almost when you're not mindful is when you are taking it personal.
Yep.
That you're not mindful of that moment.
That's right. And that is an aspect that is unfortunately prevalent in the modern mindfulness movement. And one of the things that I've started to say to differentiate that is a way of being mindful of mindlessness. Because when you're holding in mind things that may seem spiritual or advanced or whatever you might want to label, you might want to put on it, but it promotes I-making, it's promoting mindlessness, isn't it? And so again, this gets right back to the Buddha's application of mindfulness as taught here and throughout his teaching career, of the proper application of mindfulness. Mindfulness doesn't just mean to hold in mind whatever is occurring. It means hold in mind the Eightfold Path as a reference to what's occurring. And it may be a little bit more simplified way of saying that is seeing things from the perspective of right view. That's profound mindfulness. That's refined mindfulness. Let me continue. In this way, one remains mindful internally and externally with regard to the body. Remember might be the Upada Sutta. I'm getting a little mixed up lately in my advanced years. The Buddha taught that it was I can't think of it. A recent talk in Sutta on fabrications in the 5 clinging aggregates and how internal and external references to form, feeling, etc., are just form. In other words, an internal might be this is occurring within me. An external view might be if I do something, I can establish myself in the realm of nothingness. That's an external application. Or thinking that I have to have been using this, excuse me, Frank, that I am the world's greatest baker. That even if it's true, if holding it in mind is an external application of who I am, I'm establishing myself in a non-physical realm, this imaginary realm of the world's greatest baker. It sounds like a silly example, but we do that with a lot of things, and we establish ourselves in non-physical ways. That's what the Buddha is referring to here, is internally and externally. He says that it's just one thing. There's nothing internal or external. It's what's occurring to a mind.
So it's all sort of judgments based on mental fabrications.
Yeah. And so what Helen's referring to, the dependent origination, from ignorance as a requisite condition comes fabrication. From fabrications comes consciousness, meaning ongoing thinking rooted in and informed by fabrications that themselves have arisen from ignorance, and then the rest of dependent origination. So a mind that is fabricated, as he said in the sutta I just referenced, a mind that is born of fabrication will continue to fabricate fabrications. How do you get out of it? It's another way of saying we will create very powerful strategies to ignore the fact that we're ignorant of Four Noble Truths. The Buddha recognized that as a primary problem. How do we get out of it? How do we recognize that our views are rooted in ignorance, given the proclivity to ignore our own ignorance? An Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is a path that is provided so that we have a reference to recognize and abandon our own ignorance. I'm going to go back one and read a little bit further. In this way, one remains mindful internally and externally with regard to the body, with no self-reference, calmly noticing there is a body, remaining independent of and not clinging to anything in the world. Notice Buddha didn't say, referencing there is my body. It's simply a body. And even though I have a strong self-identity with this body, it's possible to let go of that self-identification and recognize this is just a body. And when I can do that at the most profound level, I have freed myself of any fabrications that would lead me to think that this is me, this is mine, this is what I am. And when you understand impermanence, I think you're all going to get this, when you understand impermanence, how could this be me? Because it's not me anymore. Again, it's not me. And it's not me again. Do you see my silliness where I'm taking this?
Yeah.
We're always in a constant state of becoming. When we fix ourselves on an idea or an ideology of what we think we want to be or are, what we believe we are, we've dismissed the fact that things are always in a constant process of changing. So why don't I be mindful of who and what I am in this present moment and let that be enough? Because it's all I can ever be. I can't be anything other than what I am right in this moment. It doesn't mean I might have some accomplishments in life, but those are impersonal too, aren't they? And if what's most important in a human life is to have a mind that's resting and at peace no matter what's occurring, this is the path to doing it. And it's the most meaningful and rewarding life that a human being can ever have, to have control of their thinking. That's what the Buddha's teaching. And to have that thinking united in its body no matter what's occurring, because then you're actually living your life. No one can live their life in the past or in the future or from a fabricated view of themselves. You can't, because you're not there. All the tension in our lives arises from creating an image of who we think we are and then holding that out to the world, but not letting the world see what's really behind it. We're all like the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the man in the curtain, because we'll get found out. But what gets found out about us? What's the most profound understanding that we can find out about ourselves? We made it all up. And since we made it all up, we can let it all go and come back to what's occurring. It's amazing, the teaching, when you think about it, isn't it, in the right perspective? Okay, I think it is.
I think it is.
Calmly noticing there is a body, remaining independent of and not clinging to anything in the world. That's what that says. It's specifically not that I'm clinging to my red Ferrari. I'm not clinging myself to my red Ferrari. Well, it's a red Prius, but it's the same thing. You get the idea.
In very close time.
The way I drive now it is. The Buddha continues. Concentration is the foundation that supports refined mindfulness. Can't argue with that, can you? Being mindful of what is occurring in relation to the Eightfold Path is refined mindfulness. I'm going to say that again. Being mindful of what is occurring in relation to the Eightfold Path is refined mindfulness. We develop concentration to increase our mindfulness, and then we hold in mind the Eightfold Path. Being mindful of the breath in the body is the foundation of developing understanding of an ego personality and its relation to the distraction of stress. Oh, these are my words, I'm sorry. Being mindful of the breath in the body interrupts outer focus, clinging, conditioned thinking, and begins to quiet the mind with directed inner mindfulness. It interrupts that ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance. Being mindful of the in-breath and the out-breath brings mindfulness to the arising and passing away of all phenomena. Notice that there is no specialness or applied emphasis attached to the normal breathing cycle. Okay, now the Buddha's words. When walking, be mindful of walking. We had an interesting talk about that earlier. Again, one of the most world famous modern Buddhist teachers has created a whole lineage and practice about walking meditation, something the Buddha never taught. He taught to be mindful of the breath as a meditation practice, not mindfulness of the feet. When walking, be mindful of walking. When standing, be mindful of standing. So there's nothing important or extraordinary about walking or standing, except that we should be mindful of it when we're doing it. But it doesn't mean we should create a practice over doing it. These are just ordinary experiences that the Buddha is saying to treat them ordinarily with mindfulness. When sitting, be mindful of sitting. When lying down, be mindful of lying down. In any function, be mindful that there is a body. Not there is my body, there's a body that's having this experience. When going about, looking this way and that, be fully mindful. Not attaching myself to this and that. This is what I'm doing. When carrying a bowl or a cloak, be fully mindful. When eating, drinking, or savoring food, be fully mindful. When eliminating waste, be fully mindful. When walking, standing, sitting, sleeping, walking, talking, or silent, be fully mindful. In this way, one remains mindful of the breath in the body, the in-breath and the out-breath. In all those scenarios, and Buddha could just say, in every situation you find yourself, be mindful of the breath in the body. Because there's nothing extraordinary about those situations except we make it so. And he's also teaching us that in every situation, we can maintain a well-concentrated mind.
I need to add one just for myself. When you put something down, be mindful of where you put it.
Especially your keys, yeah.
You get going in your day, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, where did I just put that paper? Where did I put that phone?
Yep, thank you. That's great. In this way, one remains mindful of the breath in the body, the arising and the passing away of the body, independent of and not clinging to anything in the world. Just as a person with good eyesight, emptying a bag full of mixed grains, would know this is wheat, this is rice, these are beans, these are sesame seeds. In the same way, one remains mindful from the soles of the feet to the top of the head, encased in skin, that there is hair, nails, teeth, tendons, bones, marrow, organs, feces, phlegm, blood, urine, sweat, fat, tears, saliva, mucus, and fluid in the joints. Meaning, again, we shouldn't meditate about this. Just recognize this is what's occurring. There's all these functions and different aspects of this body. And I'm mindful of it. I'm in it. In this way, one remains mindful of the four elements of the earth, the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the wind element. Be mindful of the impermanence of the body to develop dispassion. If left unattended, a corpse decays quickly. It becomes bloated and infested. It is picked at by birds and dogs and other creatures. Eventually, nothing is left but dust. That's one of the famous modern meditations is the meditation on the charnel grounds or in the cemetery. And this is what's used as the foundation for that type of meditation practice. The Buddha's not teaching a meditation practice here, is he? He's just simply, it's actually a teaching on impermanence and helping us, encouraging us to become disenamored with this body, because they're all going to end up, they're all impermanent, and they're all going to end up picked at by birds and dogs. Well, I'm just saving me only for Bodhi, but we'll see how. In this way, one remains mindful of the breath in the body, the in-breath and the out-breath. In other words, in this way means, by doing this right meditation method, in this practice, the way he's describing it, always coming back to the breath in the body, we are developing that so important level of jhana that can rest in equanimity in this way. In this way, one remains mindful of the arising and the passing away of the body, independent of and not clinging to anything in the world. This is how one remains mindful of the breath in the body. It was a rather long sequence there to get right back to where the Buddha started, to be mindful of the breath in the body. And he's simply using these different scenarios that he noticed are common distractions to take us back to being mindful of the breath in the body. This is mindfulness of feelings. And how does one remain mindful of feelings in and of themselves? When feeling pain, be mindful there is pain. When feeling pleasure, be mindful there is pleasure. When feeling neither pleasure nor pain, meaning ambivalence, be mindful that there is neither pleasure nor pain. Perhaps in relation to what's developed, it's probably one of the most profound small teachings the Buddha ever gave. Because most of us are inclined to, when we find pain, to run away from it or develop strategies that we can avoid it in any way possible. And when we find something pleasurable, to exaggerate it and over-exaggerate it and make more of that mind. And certainly ambivalence by most of us is felt as boredom. Boredom is a mind that is in the moment, immediately seeking distraction. The Buddha is saying when you find that there's pain in the body, okay, come back to the sensation of breathing. And he's not saying that we should never take an aspirin or whatever we might do, but in meditation, don't use meditation to manipulate pain. Anthony was here on Saturday night, and he was talking about mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a wonderful program. I would never discourage anybody from taking mindfulness-based stress reduction, especially from a qualified teacher. But in that method, you're taught to manipulate pain, and it's usually pretty successful. And that's fine to do, but don't use that method. That's what I talked to Anthony about Saturday. You were there. That's not a meditation method. It's a pain management method. When we're doing shamatha vipassana meditation, simply notice that pain is present. If you're also an MBSR practitioner, you learn someplace else that you should breathe into your pain, don't habitually do that. You can do it afterwards or before, but as far as your meditation practice is concerned, keep it pure. When there's pain, there is pain. When there's pleasure, there's pleasure. When there's neither pleasure nor pain, that's simply what's occurring. Come back to the sensation of breathing.
Can you turn off that? Can you do both?
It's very hard. It's a problem with the conditioned thinking, but as concentration increases, you should be able to. But I found myself, even after I started doing just shamatha vipassana meditation, occasionally falling back into, the first meditation method was TM. And even after doing this meditation method for a few years, every now and then, usually when I was pretty tired, I'd find myself using that mantra again. It's just, there it was. And okay, it's just, to me, then it was just a distraction. Come back to the sensation of breathing. But if you train yourself, and it's one of the reasons why I caution people against substituting other things that are often taught as okay for beginners, such as counting. The reason why is initially counting to begin your meditation practice might help you, but at some point you're going to have to get past it because it's not really mindful of the breath, is it? It's mindfulness of numbers or any other practice that we might use. So keep this practice pure. Again, if you've developed something that you find is useful to managing pain, great, do it, but don't do it as part of your shamatha vipassana meditation practice. When feeling the pain of the body, be mindful that there is pain of the body. When feeling pain of the not of the body, meaning a disturbance in the mind, be mindful that there is pain not of the body. When feeling pleasure in the body, be mindful that there is pleasure in the body. When feeling pleasure not in the body, meaning an excitement of the mind, be mindful that there is pleasure not in the body. When feeling neither pleasure nor pain in the body, be mindful that there is neither pleasure nor pain in the body, etc., etc. In this way, one remains mindful of feelings and the arising and passing away of feelings, independent of and not clinging to anything in the world. Feelings arise and pass away. I don't have to attach myself to those feelings in any way by saying I want more or less of it. It's simply a feeling. And the more that I do it, and the less I'm distracted by it, the more I'm teaching myself to be dispassionate about my own feelings. And the more that I can be dispassionate about my own feelings, the more my mind is calm and at peace, isn't it? the less self-reference there is in the world to me. In this way, one remains mindful internally and externally in regards to feelings. This is how one remains mindful of feelings in and of themselves. Anybody have questions about that? And you understand in meditation, we simply are recognizing that a feeling has distracted me. I come back to the sensation of breathing, right? Mindfulness of thoughts. And how does one remain mindful of thoughts in and of themselves? When thoughts are passionate, be mindful that thoughts are passionate. When thoughts are dispassionate, be mindful that thoughts are dispassionate. When there are thoughts of aversion, be mindful there are thoughts of aversion. When thoughts are free of aversion, be mindful that thoughts are free of aversion. When thoughts are deluded, be mindful that thoughts are deluded. When thoughts are free of delusion, be mindful that thoughts are free of delusion. So it doesn't mean, the Buddha's not teaching us to analyze our thoughts, simply to recognize them as they arise. If it's an adverse thought, to recognize it, come back to the sensation of breathing. If I recognize that the thought is delusion, what used to come up for me a lot of times was pretty soon I'm going to be center field for the Yankees. It was a deluded thought. Many times I kept going with it. Jesus, I was just another 6 inches and 20 years younger, and somebody noticed me. A deluded, just recognize a delusion, come back to the sensation of breathing. Any type of thought that is a distraction, come back to the sensation of breathing. When the mind is constricted, be mindful that the mind is constricted. When thoughts are scattered, be mindful that thoughts are scattered. When the mind is spacious, be mindful that the mind is spacious. A lot of people will remark when they start a meditation practice is, I feel my mind getting spacious. Well, be careful, it's not a distraction, because the mind doesn't necessarily need to be spacious. It just needs to be well concentrated. Spaciousness seems to come though. When thoughts are common, be mindful that thoughts are common. When thoughts are unsurpassed, be mindful that thoughts are unsurpassed. When the mind is not concentrated, be mindful that the mind is not concentrated. And equally as important, when the mind is concentrated, be mindful that the mind is concentrated. It's important, and we talked about that a lot during the series on jhanas, to recognize the ever deepening levels of concentration that you've developed. When the mind is not released, be mindful that the mind is not released. When probably one of the most important aspects of meditation, when you notice that you're still clinging to objects, events, views, and ideas, notice it. Don't do anything else with it. Just understand you need to continue right effort and come back to the sensation of breathing. When the mind is released, be mindful that the mind is released. So as important, when you find in meditation that your mind is free and thoughts are just flowing and you're able to maintain mindfulness of your breath, recognize it. That's concentration. It's important to recognize it too. In this way, one remains mindful internally and externally with regards to thoughts. Okay. The present quality of mind, the fourth foundation of mindfulness. And how does one remain mindful of the present quality of mind in and of itself, meaning free of distraction? One remains focused on the mind internally or externally on the mind itself. One remains focused on the origination of the mind and the passing, the arising and the passing away with regard to the mind itself. One knows there is a mind. That's an important thing, and it relates to the fourth foundation of mindfulness. To start uniting the mind and the body, there has to be the realization that there is a mind that I am engaged with, not something that is distracting me to the past and driving my future. There is a mind. Is that clear? It's kind of a subtle distinction. But a mind well concentrated is a mind that recognizes there is a mind. Not there's a mind doing this or a mind doing that or a mind grasping after awakening or avoiding anything. There's a mind. There's a mind functioning. And the present quality of my mind might be peaceful, might be agitated, might be joyful, blissful, angry, frustrated. There is a mind. And the quality of my mind is this. Come back to the sensation of breathing. Yeah.
I don't think I do that. I think when my mind is quiet, I'm not aware that it's quiet. And I only catch it when my mind gets busy again. And I see that now it's getting busy, so therefore it was quiet enough. So you're saying when your mind is quiet, be mindful that your mind is quiet.
Yeah, you could also relate it to the fourth jhana of recognizing I have developed concentration to this point. My mind is quiet. And even when you start recognizing it, and that might be a distraction in your immediate meditation, but it's important to reinforce your deepening concentration because that's exactly what we're doing. The Buddha described the quality of an awakened human being's mind in very unmystical, unmagical, unambiguous terms. And you just use it, calm. Recognize it. It's important.
And when the mind is quiet, the quality of mind is quiet.
Yeah. But
So the mind and the quality of mind are the same thing.
But what I'm saying is I'm not mindful that my mind is quiet because my mind is quiet.
I bet you will now because you've now expressed the framework for seeing it.
I've noticed that before.
Well, see what
I'm
the,
kind of like going like a mindless. I'm not aware of my mind.
Maybe it's
It-
the passing is when you pick up on it, the passing of the calm.
well, maybe what you can
Yes,
at the end of
that's
your
exactly it.
meditation.
That's it when I pick it up.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
It's the passing of the calm time
Oh, okay.
and to realize that I've had a calm time.
Like the sea's
Not-
not rough until you see the waves.
Yeah.
Not when I'm actually calm.
At the end of your meditation session, just take one more moment and notice the quality of your mind. Period.
Yes, I do.
Don't. Well, that's this. That's the fourth foundation of mindfulness. You don't. If it's quiet, if it's calm, whatever it is, you're done with your meditation. You're done with the fourth foundation of mindfulness. But simply notice it. And it's important to say, and because we can fall into the trap of comparing pre-meditation quality of mind with post-meditation quality of mind and saying, well, my mind is so much better than it was 20 minutes ago. That's not the point. It's simply noticing the quality of mind. And if you've done the meditation method correctly, you have just spent 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 5 minutes increasing your concentration.
So the instruction you give at the end of meditation, like be mindful of your quality of mind, should really be applied throughout the whole meditation.
Yes.
And anytime you find yourself in comparison, that's automatically analysis and evaluation.
Yep.
So comparing yourself to another person in the sangha, or this
Oh, yeah.
experience to the last one, or this isn't working well for me today, you're automatically in comparison,
Comparing. Yeah.
comparing
Yeah.
and then analyzing.
One of the, I think the most personal thing anybody can do is meditate. I mean, I really think that. There's not much more that's more personal than the Tibetan word for meditation, even though the meditation methods aren't this, is gom, G-O-M, which means to become familiar with. And that's what we do when we start concentrating our mind, isn't it? We become very familiar with ourselves.
I don't think without that fourth foundation of recognize the quality of your mind, I would be able to know when I was in wrong speech, or that I needed right action, or that I needed to apply right effort, or that I was in wrong view. I think with the quality of identifying quality of mind helps me see if I'm right view or